older field hands, a man in his 30s named Elijah. Sarah was terrified she was still a child, and Elijah was old enough to be her father. Violet begged Catherine to wait to give Sarah more time. Catherine's response was cold. "You have 2 younger daughters, Violet. Would you prefer I sell them to settle this matter? Or will Sarah do her duty to this estate and to you?" Sarah was paired with Elijah that autumn. She gave birth to a daughter 9 months later and died from complications of the delivery. She was 15 years old. Violet never recovered from the loss. She continued working mechanically, speaking to no one, and in 1862, she walked into the Savannah River and drowned herself. But tragedies like Sarah and Violet's were invisible to outside observers. When visitors came to Thornhill Estate, which was rare, they saw a well-managed plantation with neat fields, a substantial house, and a workforce that appeared adequately fed and housed. The horror was carefully hidden, buried in the quarters, locked in the heritage room, encoded in Catherine's journals. Then came 1860, and everything changed. Abraham Lincoln was elected president. South Carolina seceded from the Union in December. Georgia followed in January 1861, with delegates at the Secession Convention in Milledgeville, voting 208 to 89 to leave the United States and join the Confederate States of America. War came in April with the firing on Fort Sumter. Initially, many Georgians believed it would be a short conflict, a few months, perhaps a year, and the Confederacy would establish its independence. But the war dragged on through 1861, into 1862, through 1863. Young men from Burke County marched off to fight in Virginia and Tennessee. Some returned in coffins, others didn't return at all. The war disrupted Catherine's plans in ways she hadn't anticipated. The overseer, Virgil Saya, enlisted in the Confederate Army in 1861 and was killed at Shiloh in April 1862. Finding a replacement was difficult. Most able-bodied white men were away at war. Catherine eventually hired an elderly man named Silas Kendrick, who was too old for military service. Kendrick was less brutal than Kane had been, but he was also less effective at maintaining discipline and control. The enslaved population at Thornhill Estate began to sense the shifting power dynamics. News filtered through the slave networks that connected plantations across Georgia. Whispered reports of Union victories, rumors that Lincoln had issued a proclamation freeing enslaved people in Confederate territory. Speculation about what would happen if the Yankees came south. Catherine tightened her control as best she could. She confined the enslaved population to the plantation, forbidding anyone from leaving, even to visit relatives on neighboring properties. She increased rations slightly to reduce the temptation to run away. And she accelerated her breeding program, pushing some of the children into pairings earlier than she had originally planned. Jonathan, her eldest son, turned 15 in December 1862. Catherine decided he was ready. She had selected a young woman named Rachel, 16 years old, the daughter of one of the field hands. Rachel had no say in the matter. In February 1863, Catherine arranged for Jonathan and Rachel to be married in a ceremony she conducted herself in the main house, a mockery of a wedding with no legal standing, designed purely to give a veneer of respectability to the breeding pairing. Jonathan, who had been raised in isolation from the other enslaved people and taught to think of Catherine as his benefactors, accepted this arrangement without question. He had no understanding of what had been done to him, no awareness that Catherine was his biological mother, no sense of the profound wrongness of the entire situation. Rachel, traumatized into silence, said nothing. But others in the quarters were watching. They saw Catherine pairing the special children, the ones she'd raised in the main house, with the other enslaved young people. They understood this was the next phase of whatever Catherine had been planning all these years. And a quiet, desperate rage began building in the quarters. A rage that would have nowhere to go until circumstances finally shifted in their favor. The spring of 1863 brought terrible news to Burke County. Confederate losses were mounting. The Union Army controlled the Mississippi River after the fall of Vicksburg. In July, Lee's invasion of Pennsylvania ended in disaster at Gettysburg. Shortages of food, cloth, and basic supplies made life increasingly difficult, even for white plantation families. For the enslaved population, conditions became harsher still as Catherine rationed everything more severely. But something else was happening at Thornhill Estate, something Catherine tried desperately to hide from the outside world. The children she had been breeding and raising were becoming aware of their true parentage. It began with Elena, Catherine's second-born daughter, now 14 years old. She had always been the most observant of Catherine's children, the one who asked uncomfortable questions. In May 1863, while helping Catherine organize papers in the study, Eleanor discovered one of the coded journals that Catherine had carelessly left unlocked. Elena had learned to read from Catherine herself. She was intelligent, curious, and bored with the limited reading material available in the house. The journal's cipher intrigued her. She spent 3 weeks working on it in secret, the same way Richard had done 16 years earlier, slowly decoding the substitution pattern. What she found destroyed her understanding of her entire existence. The journal detailed her conception. Second planting with rootstock 2. Thomas age 21. Excellent physical specimen. Strong back. Good teeth. Weather warm and humid. Anticipate harvest in late October, 1848. Elena read the entry again and again, her hands shaking. Rootstock 2. Thomas. She knew Thomas. He was one of the field hands, quiet man in his 30s, who never made eye contact with anyone. He was her father. Catherine was her mother. She was not an orphan raised out of charity. She was the product of Catherine's deliberate breeding experiment. The implications cascaded through Elena's mind. If this was true for her, it was true for Jonathan, for Abigail, for all the children Catherine had brought into the main house. They were Catherine's biological children, conceived with enslaved men, and they had been lied to their entire lives. Worse still, the journal laid out Catherine's plans for their futures. Eleanor read the notations about pairings, about anticipated offspring, about the creation of a self-sustaining workforce. She saw her own name in one of the charts connected by a line to someone called Marcus Isaac's son, to be born 1862. Pairing with Eleanor, anticipated 1,865. Eleanor felt physically sick. Catherine intended to pair her with a boy who hadn't even been born yet, to force her to have children who would be enslaved on this plantation forever, to turn her into another breeding tool in this nightmare system. She confronted Catherine that night, her voice shaking with rage and horror. "I read your journal. I know what you are. I know what I am." Catherine's face went still, her eyes cold as winter. You should not have done that, Eleanor. You're my mother. Thomas is my father, and you've been planning to breed us like animals. Eleanor could barely force the words out. Sit down, Catherine commanded. No, sit down. The threat in Catherine's voice was unmistakable. Eleanor sat, her whole body trembling. Catherine paced the room, her mind clearly working through the problem Eleanor now represented. Finally, she spoke. You are intelligent enough to understand the position we're in. So, I'll speak plainly. Yes, I am your biological mother. Yes, I have been implementing a systematic program to create a self-sustaining workforce for this estate. And yes, you and the others will participate in that program when you come of age. I won't, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. You will, because the alternative is far worse. Catherine leaned forward, her face inches from Eleanor's. Right now, you live in this house. You eat good food. You wear decent clothes. You can read and write. What do you think happens if you refuse to cooperate? I sell you. I sell you to a plantation in Alabama or Mississippi, where they work field hands to death in 5 years, where women are brutalized as a matter of course, where literacy earns you a whipping or worse. Is that what you want? Eleanor said nothing, tears streaming down her face. I thought not. Catherine straightened. You will not speak of this to your brothers or sisters. You will not speak of it to anyone in the quarters. You will continue your life exactly as before. And when the time comes for you to fulfill your role in this family's future, you will do so. Do you understand? Yes, Eleanor whispered. But Catherine had made a critical error. She had revealed the truth without adequately controlling the information. Eleanor did speak to others, not immediately, but gradually, carefully. She told Jonathan first, showing him the journal entries she had memorized. Jonathan's reaction was different from Eleanor's. He had been so thoroughly conditioned by Catherine, so completely isolated from any alternative framework for understanding the world, that he struggled to see what was wrong with Catherine's plan. She gave us a better life, Jonathan said, confused by Eleanor's anger. We could have been working in the fields. Instead, we're here. We're property, Jonathan. We're slaves. Our own mother enslaved us. She's protecting us. She's keeping us together. If we were sold, we'd be separated, sent to different places. This way, we stay together. We stay at Thornhill. Eleanor realized with horror that Jonathan had been too successfully indoctrinated. He couldn't see the cage Catherine had built around all of them. But Abigail, 13 years old and sharp as glass, understood immediately when Eleanor told her. And Margaret, at 12, understood too. The younger children were still too young to fully grasp it. But the older ones, they knew now. They knew what they were and what Catherine intended for them. The knowledge changed the atmosphere in the main house. Catherine felt it. That shift in the air, the way her children looked at her now. There was fear, yes, but also something else. Calculation, waiting. They were biding their time, and Catherine knew it. She considered her options. She could sell the older children, eliminate the problem, but that would waste years of investment and planning. She could punish them severely enough to break their spirits, but physical brutality might damage them in ways that would interfere with the breeding program. She needed them healthy, capable of bearing children. So, Catherine chose a different approach. She would demonstrate the consequences of disobedience through someone else. In August 1863, a young woman named Grace tried to run away from Thornhill Estate. She was 17, pregnant, and desperate. She had been paired with one of the field hands against her will, and she couldn't bear the thought of bringing a child into this system. She ran at night, heading east toward the Savannah River, hoping to somehow cross into South Carolina, and from there make her way to Union lines. She was caught within 12 hours. The dogs tracked her to a creek 3 miles from the plantation. She was brought back, locked in one of the outbuildings. And the next morning, Catherine assembled everyone, all the enslaved people, including her special children from the main house in the yard between the quarters and the mansion. Grace was brought out, her hands tied. Catherine stood on the porch of the main house, her face expressionless. This woman attempted to abandon her responsibilities to this estate and to all of you. She attempted to destroy the family we have built here. The penalty for such betrayal must be severe. What followed was brutal. Grace was whipped publicly. 20 lashes administered by the elderly overseer Kendrick, who carried out the punishment with grim reluctance. Catherine made all the children watch, including her own biological offspring. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who try to leave. But Catherine had miscalculated again. The public punishment didn't terrify the enslaved population into submission. Instead, it clarified something for them. Catherine was willing to use extreme violence to maintain her control, which meant she was afraid. And if she was afraid, that meant they had more power than they'd realized. Whispers began circulating through the quarters in the weeks that followed. Whispers about waiting for the right moment. Whispers about what would happen when the war ended, because surely it would end. And surely the Yankees would come south, and surely things would change. All they had to do was survive until then. Ella La Nena heard these whispers. She began spending time near the quarters when Catherine wasn't watching, developing relationships with the other enslaved people. She had been kept separate from her entire life. She learned things Catherine had never told her. About her father Thomas, about the other men Catherine had used, about the women who had died or been broken by Catherine's program. One evening in October, Ella La Nena met with a group of the older enslaved women in the woods beyond the quarters. They sat in a circle in the darkness, speaking in low voices. A woman named Hope, in her 40s, looked at Ella La Nena with something between pity and respect. "Your mama. She thinks she made something special here," Hope said quietly. "Thinks she made family. But all she did was make people who hate her in ways she can't even understand." "What happens when the war ends?" Eleanor asked. "Depends on who wins," Hope replied. "Yankees win. We're free. Confederates win. Things stay the same or get worse. But either way, your mama can't keep doing what she'd been doing. Too many people know. Too many people angry. Something got to break." "What if we made it break?" Eleanor asked. The women looked at her in surprise. Hope leaned forward. "What you saying, child?" "What if we didn't wait for the war to end? What if we ended this ourselves?" The idea hung in the air, dangerous and intoxicating. One of the younger women, Anna, spoke up. "You talking about running, taking everyone and running? Or fighting?" Eleanor said. "There's only Mrs. Catherine and old Mr. Kendrick. There are 40 of us, and 20 of them are children," Hope said practically. "And where are we going to go? Confederates catch runaways. They kill us or sell us further south. And you? You think they're going to see you as one of us, or one of them?" The question stung because Eleanor didn't know the answer. She was Catherine's daughter. She had grown up in the main house. She could read and write. Her skin was lighter than most of the people in the quarters. Would they even accept her if things came to violence? Before Eleanor could respond, they heard footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Everyone scattered, melting into the darkness. Eleanor ran back toward the main house, her heart pounding, wondering if someone had heard their conversation, if Catherine would find out if everything was about to collapse. But no punishment came. The next day passed normally, and the day after that it seemed they had escaped detection. But the seed had been planted. The idea that they didn't have to passively wait for external forces to free them. They could act themselves. That idea began spreading through the quarters like a fever. Catherine sensed the change, but couldn't identify its source. She increased her surveillance, had Kendrick patrol the quarters at night, restricted movement even further. The tension at Thornhill Estate grew thicker with each passing week. It was like watching a storm build on the horizon. Dark clouds massing, electricity charging the air, everyone waiting for the lightning to strike. The break came in March of 1864, but not in the way anyone expected. A unit of Confederate cavalry came through Burke County, requisitioning supplies from plantations, food, horses, cloth, anything useful for the war effort. Catherine had no choice but to comply. She provided corn, preserved meat, and 2 of the plantation's best horses. The soldiers stayed only one night, camped in the fields beyond the quarters, and departed at dawn. But their presence had consequences. The soldiers spoke openly about the war's progress, and the news was bad for the Confederacy. Sherman was pushing through Georgia. Union forces were closing in from multiple directions. Some soldiers spoke fatalistically about the war being lost, about going home, about the impossibility of maintaining the fight much longer. The enslaved population at Thornhill Estate heard every word. Hope surged through the quarters. Freedom was coming. It might be months or weeks, but it was coming. All they had to do was hold on a little longer. Except Catherine, sensing this hope, and terrified by what it meant for her long-term plans, decided to act